It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones. November in Cedar Falls, Minnesota, had a way of making the air feel heavier, slower, quieter. That Sunday afternoon, the streets along Linden Avenue were nearly empty. A few yards away, the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace drifted into the crisp wind. At exactly 2:06 p.m., the first 911 call came in. A woman's voice, high and shaking, cut through the dispatcher's headset. "I just heard shots. It sounded close, real close." 2 more calls followed within seconds. This time, the words weren't just about the sound, they were about what had been seen. A man down in a driveway. A vehicle across the street with its engine still running. And most hauntingly, a small child in the back seat, motionless. Cedar Falls wasn't a place where gunfire was part of daily life. It wasn't the kind of town where you learn to tell the difference between fireworks and a handgun. For most people here, violence belonged to headlines in faraway cities, not to the cracks in the asphalt of their own streets. The first responding officer was Deputy Tyler Reeves. He had been only 3 blocks away, serving an eviction notice on a rental property. When the radio traffic mentioned multiple gunshots and possible victims, he dropped everything and ran to his patrol SUV. The siren didn't have time to reach full pitch before he pulled onto Linden Avenue. What he saw first didn't make sense. A silver pickup truck was parked awkwardly, nose angled toward an open garage. Underneath it, legs stretched out, still unmoving. Reeves' hand instinctively went to his sidearm as he moved closer, eyes scanning for any sign of movement beyond the truck. The second thing he saw made his stomach turn. Across the street, a navy blue compact SUV sat idling. Through the driver's side window, a young woman was slumped forward, her forehead resting against the steering wheel. The thin line of blood down her temple was already drying in the cold air. And in the back seat, strapped into a booster seat, was a boy, maybe 4 years old, holding a small cardboard box of chicken nuggets like it was the only solid thing left in the world. His eyes were wide but empty. He didn't cry. He didn't move. Reeves didn't need to check for a pulse on either adult. The stillness was answer enough. He turned his attention to the child, opening the back door slowly, speaking in the calm, deliberate tone cops learned from years of defusing panic. "Hey buddy, you're okay. You're safe. I'm going to get you somewhere warm." The boy didn't answer, just clutched the nuggets tighter as Reeves lifted him out and carried him to a neighbor's porch. Mrs. Linda Torres, who lived 2 doors down, took the child inside without asking questions. She'd been in Cedar Falls long enough to know when words weren't needed. By now, backup units were arriving. They began securing the area, stringing yellow tape across the street, moving neighbors back. Every officer there understood. The shooter could still be nearby. Ryan Cole, the man under the truck, had been 31 years old. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew him in some way, through his farm equipment repair shop, through his volunteering at the local high school's auto tech class, through his friendly habit of helping neighbors without ever sending a bill. The woman in the SUV was Melissa Harper, 26, Ryan's partner of nearly 5 years. Melissa worked the night shift at Rosewood Bakery on Main Street, often slipping free pastries to the kids who hung around after school. To most, she was the kind of person who remembered birthdays and always asked about your family first. The boy in the back seat, Noah, was their son. He had been diagnosed with autism at age 3. Friends said Ryan and Melissa's lives revolved around making the world easier for him to navigate. From the outside, their life was simple, steady, good. But like most small towns, Cedar Falls had its quiet tensions. And for Ryan Cole, the shadows in his life weren't born from his relationship with Melissa. They came from his past. Before Melissa, Ryan had been with Samantha Blake. They had met in high school, young and inseparable. By the time they were 20, they were parents to 2 children, a girl, Lila, and a boy, Mason. It was a lot for 2 kids barely out of their teens. In 2013, the relationship ended, and Samantha moved back to Texas to live with her family. The custody arrangement was unconventional. The kids spent the school year with Ryan in Minnesota, then traveled to Texas each summer to stay with Samantha. For years it worked well enough. Until it didn't. On the day of the murders, witness statements began filtering in. Maggie Torres, whose kitchen window looked directly into Ryan's driveway, told detectives she had seen Ryan and a stranger talking beside the pickup. The man was thin, wearing a dark hoodie and cargo pants, with a trimmed but uneven beard. They seemed calm at first, but Maggie had turned away for only a moment before the first shot rang out. She saw Ryan stagger and drop. Then she heard the SUV pull up, Melissa arriving home. Her window was down, maybe to wave at Ryan. The man turned, raised the gun, and fired into the vehicle. Melissa's head snapped forward. The shooter turned back to Ryan, who had crawled under the truck in a desperate bid for cover. More shots followed. Then silence. The man didn't run toward a car. He ran toward the back of the property, disappearing over a fence. Detectives began their work with the usual questions. Who would want Ryan and Melissa dead? What could connect these killings to the life they'd lived here? There was no sign of a robbery. No drugs. No debt collectors. And yet the precision of the attack, the calm, the accuracy of the shots, suggested someone with training, not a random act. Within hours, the state crime lab had cataloged 11 spent 9mm shell casings. A single firearm. Consistent grouping of shots. Whoever pulled that trigger knew exactly what they were doing. The most curious piece of evidence was found less than 50 yards from the property line. A black undershield balaclava, high quality, barely worn. It wasn't the kind of thing people dropped by accident, and it wasn't cheap. If the shooter had time, they would have taken it with them. Dropping it meant they'd been in a hurry to get away. In those first few hours, nobody could imagine how far the trail would stretch, or how much of it would lead back to Ryan's past in Texas. By the time the medical examiner arrived to remove the bodies, the November sun was sinking low, painting the taped-off street in long, cold shadows. Cedar Falls had changed in an instant. The stillness of the town wasn't peace anymore. It was shock. And somewhere beyond the neat rows of houses and frost-stiffened lawns, a man with a gun was moving farther from Linden Avenue, and closer to the next step in a plan no one yet understood. If you had asked anyone in Cedar Falls about Ryan Cole before that November afternoon, you would have heard the same words. Solid, dependable, the kind of man you could call at midnight when your tractor wouldn't start in the middle of a snowstorm. Born and raised in Minnesota farm country, Ryan grew up with grease on his hands and a sense of duty in his bones. His father ran a modest repair business out of a tin-roofed shed, and by 12, Ryan could strip down and rebuild an engine without a manual. He carried that same work ethic into adulthood, turning the family shed into a fully licensed shop with his name painted in block letters above the door. Cole's Farm Equipment Repair. But if his hands were made for fixing machines, his heart was wired for people. That's how he ended up with Samantha Blake. High school love and young parenthood. Ryan met Samantha when they were both 16, sophomores at Cedar Falls High. She was the kind of girl who could turn heads walking down the hallway, not just for her looks but for the way she spoke her mind. Ryan liked that about her. By senior year, they weren't just planning prom, they were preparing for a baby. Lila was born in the summer of 2010, followed by Mason 2 years later. Ryan was barely 20, trying to juggle diapers and carburetors, while Samantha navigated the reality of being a mother when most of her friends were heading off to college. They made it work for a while. But the pressures, money, long hours, the isolation of young parenthood, began to chip away at them. In 2013, they split. Samantha moved back to her hometown in Texas, taking the kids for the summer while Ryan had them during the school year. It wasn't a perfect arrangement, but it worked, at least on paper. In truth, cracks were already forming. Melissa enters the picture. The turning point came in 2014, when Ryan met Melissa Harper at a charity fundraiser for the local fire department. Melissa was 18, fresh out of high school and working part-time at her aunt's bakery. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in it. Friends noticed how quickly she became a fixture in Ryan's life, and in the lives of his 2 kids. By the following spring, Melissa and Ryan were living together in a small but tidy house on Linden Avenue. In 2015, they welcomed their son Noah. When Noah was diagnosed with autism at 3, Melissa threw herself into learning everything she could: therapies, routines, sensory tools, while Ryan adapted the shop schedule so he could be home more often. They didn't have much, but they had a plan: expand the business, get married, and maybe, just maybe, buy a piece of land out near the river. In a town like Cedar Falls, dreams like that weren't just daydreams. They were blueprints for a life. Custody turns to conflict. What Ryan didn't count on was that Samantha's life in Texas was changing too. In 2016, she remarried a man named Derek Vaughn, who had been the police chief in a small panhandle town. At first, Derek seemed polite enough during custody exchanges, but those who saw him up close described a different picture. Controlling, quick to temper, especially when it came to the kids. Ryan kept his distance, focusing on his own family. But in 2018, something shifted. That summer, Samantha filed for a change in the custody arrangement. She wanted Lila and Mason to live with her year-round. She cited instability in Ryan's household, though no one in Cedar Falls could figure out what she meant. The motion stalled in court, but it left both sides angry. Melissa, ever the mediator, tried to calm Ryan, reminding him that the kids needed both parents. But Ryan knew Samantha well enough to believe she wouldn't let it go. The subtle signs of escalation. By the fall of 2019, friends noticed small changes in Ryan's behavior. He checked the shop's security cameras twice a day, even when nothing seemed out of place. He started locking the garage during work hours, which he'd never done before. Melissa told her coworker at the bakery that Ryan had been on edge since September, though she didn't know exactly why. He hadn't said much, just that he felt like someone was watching. Then in late October, Samantha made an unannounced trip to Cedar Falls. She showed up at Ryan's shop, alone, and asked to take Lila and Mason for the weekend. Ryan refused. He later told Melissa it was the look in Samantha's eyes that unsettled him. Not sadness, not even anger, but something colder. That weekend, Melissa noticed a black SUV parked down the street from their house, idling for nearly 20 minutes before driving away. She mentioned it to Ryan, but neither of them thought to report it. In a small town, you get used to assuming a stranger is probably just lost. Derek Vaughn's unraveling. Meanwhile in Texas, Derek Vaughn's life was in freefall. He had lost his job as police chief the year before, after a video surfaced of him berating his 3-year-old stepdaughter during dinner. In the recording, posted on Facebook by Samantha, Derek's voice was sharp, aggressive, the kind that made even unrelated listeners flinch. Public outrage cost him his badge. He picked up work as a delivery driver for a vending supply company, but the loss of authority seemed to gnaw at him. Co-workers described him as always on edge, ready to pick a fight over nothing. By the time Samantha's custody motion failed, Derek was behind on bills, drowning in debt, and in the middle of a bitter separation from Samantha. But there was one thing they still agreed on. Both blamed Ryan for their problems. Unseen threats. The thing about small towns is that tension rarely stays private. People talk. Bits of overheard conversation float across diner booths, get repeated in barber chairs, and soon become a patchwork of rumor and half-truth. By early November, Ryan's sister, Claire, told a friend she had a bad feeling. "It's not just the custody stuff," she said. "It's the way Samantha's talking lately. Like she's already decided what's going to happen." But no one, not Claire, not Melissa, not Ryan himself, could have guessed just how far someone would go to settle a personal score. Because somewhere hundreds of miles away, a plan was already in motion. One that would stretch from Texas to Minnesota, from whispered resentment to the sound of gunfire echoing down Linden Avenue. In small towns like Cedar Falls, you notice things without trying. A different car parked on a familiar street. A stranger's face in the corner booth at the diner. The rhythm of the place is so steady that even the smallest change sounds like a drumbeat. Melissa Harper noticed the black SUV first. It was a Thursday evening just before Halloween. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and she was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes after dinner. Out the window, parked 2 houses down, was a late-model black Chevy Tahoe. The engine was running, exhaust curling into the cold. At first, she assumed it belonged to a visitor. But 20 minutes passed and the SUV stayed where it was. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. When she mentioned it to Ryan, he dried his hands on a towel and stepped outside, casual but alert. By the time he reached the driveway, the SUV pulled away. No rush, no squeal of tires, just a slow roll into the night. Old instincts, new fears. Ryan didn't talk much about it, but something about that vehicle unsettled him. He'd grown up here, knew most people by their truck, and that SUV didn't belong to anyone in town. For the next few days, he caught himself checking the street more often. When a customer came by the shop, he'd glance past their shoulder to the road. At home, he kept the curtains drawn after dark. Melissa noticed the change. She asked if he thought it was connected to Samantha. Ryan shrugged. Could be nothing. But I don't believe in coincidences. Meanwhile in Texas, over 1,000 miles away in a small rented house on the edge of Amarillo, Derek Vaughn was making plans. His life had contracted into a narrow loop. Wake up, drive a vending truck, come home to an empty house. His marriage to Samantha was over in everything but paperwork, but they still spoke often. And when they spoke, the topic almost always came back to Ryan Cole. In Derek's mind, Ryan wasn't just an ex-husband. He was an obstacle, a rival, the man who had taken the children from Samantha and by extension from him. And when Samantha lost her most recent bid for full custody, Derek's resentment hardened into something sharper. Co-workers later told investigators they'd overheard Derek making vague but unsettling comments. Some problems you can't fix in court. Sometimes you have to handle things yourself. No one took it seriously at the time. But Derek wasn't just talking. He was gathering tools for the job he had in mind. The favor. On November 4th, Derek met up with an old friend from his law enforcement days, Ethan Morse. Ethan had left police work years ago and now worked as a security consultant. Derek told him he needed to rent a vehicle but couldn't do it in his own name due to a credit issue. He asked Ethan to book it for him, assuring him it was just for a quick work trip. Ethan didn't ask many questions. He'd known Derek long enough to assume his quirks were just that, quirks. He agreed, signed the paperwork, and handed Derek the keys to a silver Ford Explorer. What Ethan didn't know, or claimed later not to know, was that Derek had already packed the vehicle with a small arsenal, a 9mm handgun, extra magazines, and a black balaclava. Crossing states. Derek left Texas before dawn the next day, heading north on I-35. His route was erratic, detours through small towns, overnight stops in motels under fake names. Investigators later believed he was testing whether anyone was following him. By November 8th, he was in Iowa. 2 days later, somewhere in southern Minnesota, the Explorer was spotted on a gas station security camera. Derek was alone, wearing a black hoodie, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't go straight to Cedar Falls. Instead, he lingered in neighboring towns, driving routes that circled the area. It was as if he was mapping the terrain, learning the streets, watching for patterns. The second sighting. Melissa saw the black SUV again on November 14th. This time, it was parked at the end of the block in the late afternoon, the low sun turning its tinted windows into mirrors. She mentioned it to Ryan again, and this time his answer was short. "I'll take care of it." That night, Melissa overheard him on the phone with someone, maybe his sister, maybe an old friend from the volunteer fire department. His voice was low, but she caught fragments. "Don't know who it is, not random, keeping an eye out." Melissa didn't push. She had learned that when Ryan went quiet like that, it was because he was already turning a problem over in his head, looking for a way to fix it. Derek's last steps. On November 16th, Derek checked into a roadside motel just 15 miles from Cedar Falls. He paid in cash, declined housekeeping, and parked the Explorer where he could see it from the room. In the passenger seat, he kept a folded map with a single street highlighted in yellow, Linden Avenue. The next day was a Sunday. The shop would be closed. The street would be quiet. And for Derek Vaughn, quiet was exactly what he needed. If the people of Cedar Falls could have seen what was coming, they might have recognized the signs. The stranger's car that appeared and disappeared, the subtle change in Ryan's demeanor, the way Melissa had started double-checking the locks. But they didn't. Because in small towns, you don't expect the man you pass in the grocery store to be planning a killing. And by the time the sun set on November 16th, Derek Vaughn's plan was already set in motion. The morning of November 17th broke cold and still. A thin frost clung to the lawns along Linden Avenue, crunching under the boots of the early risers who braved the air. Inside their small two-story house, Ryan Cole moved with his usual Sunday rhythm, coffee brewing, phone in hand as he checked messages from a friend about a tractor part due in on Monday. Melissa was still in her robe, hair pulled into a loose bun, moving between the kitchen and living room as Noah played quietly on the carpet with a set of wooden trains. There was nothing in the air to suggest that by mid-afternoon, Linden Avenue would be a crime scene. The arrival. Around 1:45 p.m., a silver pickup pulled into Ryan's driveway. It was his own truck, freshly washed, parked where he always left it. He just finished organizing some tools in the garage when he noticed another vehicle easing up the street. A silver Ford Explorer, unfamiliar but slow-moving. It rolled past once, turned at the end of the block, and came back, stopping in front of the house next door. The driver's door opened and out stepped Derek Vaughn. Ryan recognized him instantly. He'd seen him before, at custody exchanges in Texas, always a few paces behind Samantha, eyes flat, saying little. The man's presence here, unannounced and hundreds of miles from where he lived, sent a ripple of unease through Ryan's chest. Still, Ryan stepped forward. In small towns, even when trouble walks right up to your driveway, you don't turn your back until you know for sure. The conversation. From the kitchen, Maggie Torres, Ryan's neighbor, saw the two men meet in the driveway. Derek stood near the picnic table, hands in the pocket of his black hoodie, shoulders slightly hunched against the chill. Ryan, in his flannel shirt and work boots, approached with a guarded but open posture. They spoke for a couple of minutes, voices low, expressions hard to read from a distance. Maggie couldn't make out the words, but she noticed Ryan glance toward the street twice, as if checking for something, or someone. At 1:58 p.m., the navy blue SUV Melissa drove appeared at the far end of the block. She slowed as she approached the driveway, her window halfway down. She smiled briefly toward Ryan, then her gaze flicked to the stranger beside him. The smile faded. Moments of tension. Melissa stopped the SUV just past the driveway, still in gear. Ryan's hand lifted slightly toward her, maybe as a signal to wait, maybe just a reflex. Derek turned his head, his expression unreadable. In those few seconds, the street seemed to hold its breath. Noah sat in his booster seat in the back, his small hands wrapped around a box of chicken nuggets Melissa had picked up from the diner. From Maggie's kitchen window, the scene looked ordinary enough. Two men talking, a woman arriving home. But she would later tell police that something in the air felt tight, like a cord pulled too far. The break. At 2:06 p.m., the sound that would etch itself into the memory of Linden Avenue cracked through the stillness, sharp, unmistakable. Maggie ducked instinctively, her hands braced on the counter. When she looked again, Ryan had stumbled back toward the pickup. Melissa's SUV rocked slightly as she shifted into reverse. Derek's body angled toward her vehicle. Another sound. Another. And then silence. The aftermath from inside. Inside the Torres house, Linda Torres had just come to the door when she saw her sister Maggie's face go pale. Without asking, she stepped toward the phone on the counter and dialed 911. From their window, they could see Ryan collapse out of sight behind the truck. Melissa's SUV rolled back half a car length before stopping at an awkward angle near the curb. No one saw Derek leave. One moment he was there, the next the driveway was empty except for the truck, the SUV, and the stillness that follows violence. The first on scene. Deputy Tyler Reeves arrived in under 2 minutes, his SUV coming to a stop at an angle across the street. He stepped out, scanning left and right before moving toward the nearest body, Ryan, lying on his side beneath the pickup's rear bumper. A glance across the street drew him to Melissa's SUV. The driver's window was open, the afternoon light catching on a faint smear near the frame. Melissa's head rested against the steering wheel, her hair falling forward. In the back seat, Noah sat in silence, eyes fixed on the box in his hands. His fingers gripped it so tightly the cardboard had begun to bend. Reeves' voice softened automatically. "Hey buddy, you're okay. Let's get you somewhere safe." He opened the rear door carefully, lifting the boy into his arms. Noah didn't protest, didn't cry, just kept holding the box, securing the scene. By the time additional units arrived, the street was closed off with yellow tape. Officers went door to door, speaking to neighbors who had peeked through curtains at the sound of the shots. Maggie's account was the most detailed. The arrival of the unfamiliar man, the brief conversation, Melissa's approach, the stillness before it all unraveled. Detectives noted the position of the vehicles, the absence of shell casings in the immediate open space, suggesting the shooter had been careful about where he stood. The 9mm casings they did find were close together, indicating a shooter who knew his stance, who didn't waste movement. Near the back fence line, a K9 unit picked up a faint trail. 50 yards into a narrow strip of scrub, they found the black balaclava. Clean, high quality, no tags. It was the first real piece of physical evidence. A quiet street changed forever. By 4 p.m., the medical examiner had taken both bodies. Neighbors stood in small clusters behind the tape, speaking in hushed tones. For decades, Linden Avenue had been the kind of place where people waved from porches, where kids biked in the street without looking over their shoulders. That day, something in the air shifted. The sound of a screen door closing made people flinch. The violence had been precise, deliberate, and close enough to touch. And for the detectives now taking over the case, one question was louder than the rest. Who walks up a quiet Minnesota driveway on a Sunday afternoon and ends 2 lives without hesitation? Detective Laura Hensley had been with the Cedar Falls Police Department for 12 years, but in that time she had never seen a case so precise and so personal. The killer had not fired wildly. He had not stolen anything. He had arrived, ended 2 lives, and vanished. By the time Laura arrived at Linden Avenue, the street had the heavy stillness of a place that knew it had been changed forever. Yellow tape cordoned off 2 front yards. The pickup and the Navy SUV were still in place, photographed from every angle. Officers stood in quiet knots, comparing notes, pointing at shell casings marked with numbered evidence tents. The first solid clue. K9 handler Mark Jensen approached Laura holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the black balaclava found along the back fence line. "High-end fabric, barely worn," Mark said. "It's not something you drop unless you're in a hurry." Laura turned the bag over in her hands. The knit was tight, the kind you'd find in tactical gear shops, not in a discount store. Whoever had worn it had money, training, or both. The crime lab could run DNA, but that would take time. What they needed now was movement. Anything to stop this trail from going cold. Interviewing the witness. Inside her kitchen, Maggie Torres recounted what she'd seen for the third time that day. Her voice shook at points, but her memory was sharp. They weren't yelling, she said. It was like they were testing each other. Melissa pulled up and slowed, and that man, he didn't even flinch. Just turned his head toward her. Maggie admitted she didn't recognize the man, but she remembered his stance. Feet planted, shoulders squared, hands deep in his hoodie pocket. It was the kind of posture you see in people who aren't afraid of confrontation. Looking backward before forward. Laura's first instinct was to dig into Ryan Cole's personal life. In cases like this, the victim's history often told the story. By early evening, she had a name that kept surfacing. Samantha Blake, Ryan's ex-wife. Court records showed years of back-and-forth custody arrangements for their two children, Lila and Mason. The most recent filings revealed a failed attempt by Samantha to gain full custody just months earlier. It was a starting point, but Laura knew they needed more than just motive. They needed proximity. The link to Texas. Calls to contacts in Texas painted a complicated picture. Samantha was recently separated from her second husband, Derek Vaughn, a former police chief who'd left the job under a cloud of scandal. His personnel file was littered with complaints about aggressive behavior, but nothing had ever stuck, until a video of him berating a toddler surfaced online. What caught Laura's attention wasn't the scandal. It was Vaughn's training. He was a skilled marksman, proficient with handguns, comfortable in tense situations. And according to a Texas DMV database, Derek Vaughn drove a late-model black Chevy Tahoe, the SUV. Melissa had told Ryan about seeing a black SUV parked near their house days before the shooting. Now, Laura had reason to believe that wasn't a coincidence. Door-to-door canvassing turned up another neighbor who'd seen the Tahoe that week. She even recalled part of the plate number, TX7. Texas plates. Laura's mind started to thread the details together. Motive, skill, and now a possible vehicle match. But Vaughn was over 1,000 miles from Cedar Falls. How had he gotten here without drawing attention? A break from an unlikely source. On the morning of November 18th, a man named Ethan Morse walked into the Cedar Falls police station, saying he'd been asked about a rental car and wanted to clear the air. He told officers that Vaughn had asked him to rent a vehicle for a quick trip because of credit problems. Morse claimed he thought nothing of it until news of the murders broke and Vaughn's name started circulating. Laura's ears sharpened when Morse described the car, a silver Ford Explorer. It matched security footage from a gas station outside of town the day before the shooting. Connecting the dots. If Morse was telling the truth, Vaughn had used the Explorer for the trip, not his Tahoe, likely to avoid being recognized. The Tahoe sightings in Cedar Falls could have been from earlier reconnaissance trips, or someone else entirely. But the Explorer put Vaughn in Minnesota right before the murders. Laura sent an urgent request to the rental company for GPS data. If they were lucky, it might still be retrievable. Meanwhile, the crime lab expedited testing on the balaclava. By the afternoon of November 19th, the call came. DNA matched to Derek Vaughn. Closing the circle. Armed with the DNA evidence, vehicle rental link, and eyewitness statements, Laura got a warrant for Vaughn's arrest. Cedar Falls PD coordinated with Texas law enforcement for a tactical approach. Vaughn was known to be armed and had a history of volatile behavior. The arrest team hit his small Amarillo rental home just before dawn on November 20th. They found multiple firearms, tactical gear, and a partially packed duffel bag. Vaughn was taken into custody without a single word. When Laura received the call confirming the arrest, she knew the investigation wasn't over. They still needed to understand the extent of Samantha Blake's role, and whether Morse's involvement stopped at the rental paperwork. But for the first time since that Sunday afternoon, Linden Avenue could exhale. The quiet in Cedar Falls had returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one that knew how quickly peace could be shattered. And for Laura Hensley, the next step was clear. Find out how far back this plan had been in motion, and how many people had helped it come to life. The Amarillo Police Department's interview room was small, with no windows, just 4 beige walls and the faint hum of an overhead vent. Derek Vaughn sat in a metal chair, his wrists cuffed to a loop bolted to the table. His black hoodie was gone, replaced by a plain gray t-shirt. Without the layers, he looked smaller, less imposing, but his eyes hadn't changed. Detective Laura Hensley and Texas Ranger Mike Ortega entered together. Laura carried a manila folder thick with printouts and photographs. Ortega set a bottle of water on the table and leaned against the wall, silent. The opening moves. Laura didn't start with the accusations. Instead, she opened the folder and slid a clear evidence bag across the table. Inside was the black balaclava. "We found this near the scene on Linden Avenue," she said evenly. Crime lab says your DNA is on it. Derek glanced at the bag but didn't touch it. Lots of ways that could happen, he muttered. Laura didn't bite. She pulled out a still frame from a gas station security camera. Derek at the pump, Explorer in the background. This is you in Minnesota. Day before the murders. Derek leaned back in his chair, the cuff chain clinking against the table leg. I drive a lot. Doesn't mean I killed anyone. Applying pressure. Laura's voice stayed calm, but her questions narrowed. Why rent a vehicle in someone else's name? Why drive 1,500 miles without telling anyone? Why bring a handgun? Derek shrugged at each one. Needed a car. Needed a change of scenery. I always carry legal in Texas. But when Laura slid a copy of Ethan Morse's statement across the table, Derek's jaw tightened. Ethan had admitted. Derek said, Ryan's gonna die. Melissa's gonna die. Derek didn't read the page, just stared at it. Ethan's lying, he said finally. Laura's reply was flat. He passed a polygraph. You didn't. Switching the focus. Laura shifted tactics. She opened another section of the folder, photographs of Samantha Blake. She placed them one by one in front of Derek. Samantha with Lila and Mason at a park, Samantha and Derek together at a wedding, Samantha holding a court document. When's the last time you spoke to Samantha? Couple weeks ago. About what? Custody stuff. The usual. Laura let a beat of silence pass. She says she didn't ask you to kill Ryan. For the first time, Derek's eyes flickered, just for a second. It was enough for Laura to know the conversation had hit a seam. Back in Minnesota. While Derek was in that Amarillo interview room, Cedar Falls detectives brought Samantha in for questioning. She wore a pale blue sweater and jeans, her hair neatly straightened, hands clasped in her lap like she was waiting for a church service to start. At first, her answers were smooth. She'd been in Texas at the time of the murders. She'd heard about Ryan's death from a mutual friend. She hadn't spoken to Derek in weeks. But then the timeline started to wobble. Phone records showed a series of calls between her and Derek in the days leading up to the shooting, some lasting nearly an hour. When confronted, she said they were about the kids, nothing more. The unraveling. Detectives shifted the angle. Instead of accusing her, they asked about her feelings after losing the custody case. She admitted it had been devastating, that she felt Ryan had taken everything. When they asked if she'd ever said those words to Derek, she hesitated. Her fingers twisted in her lap. I might have said something, in anger. The pause grew longer. Her voice dropped. I didn't think he'd actually do it. Back in Texas, tightening the noose. Laura returned to the evidence. GPS data from the rented Explorer placed Derek within 2 blocks of Linden Avenue at 1:55 p.m. on November 17th. Shell casing analysis confirmed all rounds were fired from the same 9mm handgun, registered to the Sunridge Police Department, where Derek had once been chief. That gun was missing from the department's inventory. When Laura laid all of this in front of him, Derek's posture changed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the chain clinking again. If I talk, what happens to Samantha? He asked. Laura didn't promise anything. She just waited. The admission. It didn't come all at once. Derek started with small pieces. Yes, he'd driven to Minnesota. Yes, he'd watched the house for days. Yes, he'd talked to Ryan that afternoon. But the moment where conversation shifted to violence was murky. She wanted him gone, he said finally. Said she couldn't get her kids back any other way. I told her I'd take care of it. He claimed Melissa wasn't supposed to be there, that she'd just come home at the wrong time. But investigators knew that kind of language, distancing, reframing. The fact was, Melissa had been killed with the same precision as Ryan. Lining up the charges. By the time Laura left Amarillo with Derek's partial confession, the case file had swelled to hundreds of pages. Back in Cedar Falls, Samantha was now facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecution's theory was clear. Samantha, angry over losing custody, had expressed her desire for Ryan's death. Derek, with motive of his own and the means to carry it out, had planned and executed the killings. Ethan Morse's rental agreement had helped mask Derek's travel, but the DNA, GPS, and witness accounts closed the circle. A town waiting for justice. As Derek was extradited to Minnesota, news of the arrest spread quickly through Cedar Falls. For some, it brought relief. For others, it raised new questions. How could someone they'd once seen at the farmer's market, standing beside Samantha and the kids, carry out something so calculated? And how could the mother of 2 of Ryan's children play any role in it? Those answers would come, or at least be argued, at trial. For now, the case had shifted from searching for a killer to proving, beyond doubt, how and why 2 lives were taken on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The courthouse in Cedar Falls was not built for spectacle. It was a modest, brick building, more accustomed to traffic tickets and property disputes than high-profile murder trials. But on the morning of June 8, every seat in the gallery was full. The air buzzed with the low murmur of reporters, local residents, and family members of both the victims and the accused. At the center of it all sat Derek Vaughn, dressed in a dark suit provided by the public defender's office, his beard neatly trimmed, his posture stiff. A few rows behind him, Samantha Blake avoided eye contact with the crowd, her hair pulled back, face pale under the fluorescent lights. Between them sat 2 separate legal teams, their stacks of binders like walls built from paper. The prosecution's case. Assistant District Attorney Claire Morton opened with a quiet but firm tone. This was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated, deliberate act, planned in Texas, carried out in Minnesota, and fueled by resentment over a custody decision. She laid out the timeline in methodical detail. Samantha's failed custody bid, the recorded phone calls with Derek, Ethan Morse's rental of the Explorer, the GPS data placing Derek near Linden Avenue minutes before the murders, the DNA match on the balaclava. The jury saw photographs of the driveway, the vehicles, the evidence markers. They watched security footage of Derek at the Iowa gas station, the Explorer in the background. Claire's voice never rose, but every piece of evidence was another nail driven into the frame of the case. The defense. Derek's attorney painted a different picture, one of coincidence and overreach. Yes, Mr. Vaughn drove to Minnesota. Yes, he saw Ryan Cole that afternoon. But he did not kill him. There is no video, no eyewitness who can say they saw him pull the trigger. They argued that the DNA on the balaclava could have come from another time, that Ethan Morse was lying to protect himself, and that the prosecution's narrative was built on assumptions dressed as facts. For Samantha, her defense hinged on distance. She was in Texas when the murders happened. Any angry words she'd spoken to Derek were, according to her lawyer, just venting, not conspiracy. Ethan Morse on the stand. When Ethan took the stand, the room's energy shifted. He looked uncomfortable, his hands clasped together as he admitted to renting the Explorer for Derek. Under questioning, he described a conversation where Derek said Ryan wouldn't be a problem much longer. The defense tried to paint him as unreliable, but Ethan's straightforward answers and willingness to admit his own role seemed to carry weight with the jury. The turning point. The moment that broke the defense's momentum came when prosecutors played audio from a recorded jail call between Derek and an unidentified friend. In it, Derek's voice was low, almost casual. If she'd just stayed inside, none of this would have happened. The prosecution argued she referred to Melissa Harper, making it clear her death was not an accident but a consequence Derek had already accepted before he pulled the trigger. Verdicts. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. The courtroom was silent when the foreperson stood to deliver the verdicts. Derek Vaughn, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Samantha Blake, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Derek showed no visible reaction, his gaze fixed on the table. Samantha blinked hard but did not cry. In the front row, Melissa's mother gripped Ryan's sister's hand, both women holding back tears. Sentencing. In August, Judge Harold Kinsey handed down the sentences. Derek Vaughn would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Samantha Blake would serve 28 years. Before pronouncing the sentence, Judge Kinsey looked directly at Derek. You came to this state with one purpose, to take lives. You've shown no remorse. That is the definition of a dangerous man. To Samantha, his words were quieter but no less sharp. Your role may not have been behind the trigger, but without you this crime would not have happened. Aftermath. Outside the courthouse, the families of Ryan Cole and Melissa Harper faced a wall of microphones. Ryan's sister Claire spoke first. We will never get them back. But today we know the people who took them from us will never hurt anyone else. Melissa's mother added. No sentence will ever be enough. But we have to believe this is the closest thing to justice we can get. In Cedar Falls, life began to move forward, but the house on Linden Avenue remained empty. Some nights, neighbors said they still caught themselves looking toward the driveway, half expecting to see Ryan working on a truck or Melissa pulling up with Noah in the back seat. For the children. Lila and Mason, Ryan's children with Samantha, were placed in the care of Ryan's sister. Noah, too young to understand fully what had happened, was surrounded by cousins and aunts who tried to keep his days steady. But there are questions children ask that have no good answers. Questions like why their mother would want their father gone. Questions that hang in the air long after the headlines fade. The murders of Ryan Cole and Melissa Harper left more than two graves. They left holes in the fabric of a small town, fractures in a family that will never fully heal. And they left a warning, unspoken but understood by anyone who followed the case. When resentment turns into a plan, and a plan turns into action, the distance from thought to tragedy can be measured in miles, minutes, and, on one quiet Sunday in November, 11 spent shell casings.